This happened to my girlfriend and I, who I was dating back in the summer of 2014. It all took place in South Carolina when my girlfriend and I wanted to take a camping trip. We initially tried to go to a place 45 miles from our hometown, but they were going to charge us double what we thought we were going to pay for. We decided to head back, and it occurred to me that there was a spot fairly close to where we live. Now, I will say it's more of an off-grid spot. We didn't have to pay for anything though, and could just park the car and get out. The place is quite gorgeous, and there's a historic bridge and trail, as well as some of the oldest railroad tracks in the south. We got there before sunset, so we had plenty of time to pitch the tent and set everything up. There were a few cars when we arrived, but they were most likely hikers and would be gone by nightfall. The only thing that made us uncomfortable was a busted up and rusted old white van with no license plate. We both pointed that out, thinking it was weird, but we shrugged it off and started walking to a good place to set camp up. We spent some quality time together in nature and then went back to the tent and went to sleep. However, we were woken up at around 3 in the morning. We started to hear this obscure singing and walking in the distance. Anytime you hear any commotion that early in the morning, nothing good can happen out of it. I peered my head out of the tent to see what was going on. I didn't see anything or anyone, but nonetheless, I didn't want to stay in that area when we were both freaked out. As we were quietly gathering our belongings, we were sure that we heard the singing get louder. I recall words in the song that the person was singing, including the phrase, "Now won't y'all come out," followed by this raspy laughing. Once we finally packed the tent, we began hearing crunching on the leaves and a humming now, so we knew that this guy was close and had been steadily getting closer. I grabbed my girlfriend's hand and threw the tent and folding chairs on my back. We made sure to run the opposite way from where the noise was coming from. Luckily, we set up camp fairly close to the parking lot because I could see lights through the trees. As we ran, we scurried away from whoever was chasing us, and we noticed the lights from the parking lot weren't just the street lights, but also to our horror, it was the headlights of that old rusty white van we saw upon arrival. We hurried uphill just hoping this guy was alone, as his van was right in front of my car. If he had an accomplice, that would be another person to deal with. As we reached the lot, we got into the bright street lights and we were close to our car. This guy was getting closer, and I could hear the noise of the gravel intensify. I heard this whizzing and him saying, "Don't y'all think you'll get away." As we made it past the van, we split, and I handed her the keys so she could unlock and start the car, and I could throw all the gear in the trunk and we could get out of there. I frantically laid the camping gear in the back seat and got into the driver's seat, hearing every noise this guy was making get louder and closer. With the car running, I kept my head down and put it in reverse, but curiosity got the better of me. I waited a few seconds for the man who was following us to emerge from the trail and into the parking lot. In the brightness of my headlights, we were able to see this mammoth of a man emerge with a stern, wrinkled face and red, patchy hair. He had a goatee that had dirt and crud smeared all over it. His eyes were fixated on us like a scope magnifying on two 10-point bucks. He barked, "Get back here," as he was waving a baseball bat back and forth. I shook my head, and with that, I swerved out of there and we were on the way out. In the rearview mirror, we saw the man slam the bat in frustration. I've never been happier that I listened to my instincts, and we packed up and left as soon as we heard the singing in the distance, and we didn't wait or ignore it. We drove to a Waffle House and spent the rest of the early morning there until sunrise. I went camping alone in northeast Ohio for 3 nights. I had spent the first 2 nights without incident, enjoying the quiet, the fresh air, and the stars above. But it was the 3rd night and final night that I avoided something horrible, attempted murder perhaps. I woke up at around 3 a.m. due to nature calling, so I got out of my hammock and walked about 10 feet to pee. As I stood there, I noticed a headlamp about 80 to 100 feet away, slowly moving around in the dark. I stood there watching it for about 10 minutes, trying to make sense of what I was seeing. The person would stand up, sit back down, and then move a little like they were pacing in place. My instincts told me that something wasn't right. I slipped on my boots, grabbed my hatchet for protection, and started walking towards the right side of my campsite, staying out of sight. I didn't know what this guy was up to, but I was going to find out. I made it about 50 feet from my campsite when I noticed another headlamp, this one about 40 feet away, moving around like the first. It was too much of a coincidence. 2 people, both walking around in the woods in the middle of the night nearby a campsite. This wasn't normal. I dropped to the ground and covered myself with some leaves, trying to stay hidden. The second guy came within 10 feet of where I was laying. He didn't seem to notice me at all. He lit a cigarette, took a drag, and then pulled out a beer. He finished it, then tossed the can to the ground, and after a while, he moved off in the opposite direction. Once he was far enough away, I got up and decided to head back towards the first guy. I got close enough to him that I could hear his phone dinging as it received messages. I crept closer, getting within range to see the screen lighting up with each notification. That's when he stood up and started walking towards my hammock. I froze, laying on the ground again, trying to stay as still as possible. I waited, hoping he wouldn't see me. After a few minutes, I started slowly moving back towards my camp to follow the man, trying to make my way without being heard. I wasn't close enough to see any details, but I could hear the tarp above my hammock getting ripped and trashed. Flashlights flickered, then my own big flashlight, which had been sitting next to my hammock, came on and off in the dark. I heard my mess kit being thrown to the ground, followed by voices. "He was just here," one of them said. I stayed still, holding my breath, waiting for them to leave. After a while, they moved away, and I saw my flashlight's dim light, which they had stolen, getting farther and farther. Once I was sure that they were gone, I got up and started heading back to my site. When I finally made it back, I couldn't believe my eyes. My hammock and tarp were shredded, like they had been hacked with a machete. My mess kit was stomped on, crushed under someone's boot. They took my backpack, rain gear, and flashlight. I was in shock, not sure what to do next. I walked to the spot where I had seen the first guy. I found a few chew pouches, 8 empty beer cans, and a discarded lighter. Then I went to where I had seen the second guy. There I found a bag of powder, which turned out to be meth, along with a pile of cigarette butts, and worst of all, a heap of feces with no toilet paper around. At that moment, I realized how lucky I had been to get out of there without running into them directly. I grabbed what was left of my things and left the campsite, not looking back. I assume those men were very dangerous if they are the type to do meth and walk around trying to potentially kill someone at a campsite. Maybe they were just frustrated that I had left already and they weren't able to rob me for money and cards which had been in my pocket, and therefore tore apart my campsite. Either way, I'm never camping in that area again. My best friend and I try to go camping once a year. We've been doing this since we were 13 years old. I've never really truly been scared or had anything weird happen until last year in the Blue Ridge Mountains. We showed up during peak season, and the first night, space was very limited. We were losing light, so we set up camp on the side of a mountain that was an absolute wind tunnel. When morning came, we went to town, drank beers, and hung out around town until late afternoon. By the time we got back up to the mountains to switch our camping spot, we were losing light again, but we did manage to find a more remote spot out of the wind. We got set up with our tents, got the fire going, and started drinking again. Time went by very quickly, and it was probably 1 a.m. when we saw a flashlight aimed at us, and then the flashlight turned and started walking our way. We didn't really think much of it, and assumed that it was likely a park ranger coming to fuss at us about something, because who else walks up to you in a remote part of the mountains at 1 a.m.? I don't know how other people feel about this, but ever since I started camping, I learned that it's kind of an unspoken rule that you don't walk up on someone camping that late at night unless there's an emergency. Anyways, the person got close enough and we realized that it was just some guy, probably in his 50s, in a shirt and basketball shorts, and his girl who was in her 40s and was avoiding eye contact with us. The man immediately forced a conversation about nothing, did not acknowledge the time of night or his girl, and his eyes were just darting all over the place while we were talking to him. He talked about dumb stuff, like what model or style of lantern we had and how cool it was. He was also talking about how he used to be a former law enforcement officer, completely out of context of the random conversation he had engaged us in. And all of a sudden, during the conversation, he pretended to land his flashlight on our tents and said, "Oh, that's where you guys are sleeping, huh? Cool setup." The way his eyes and flashlight were moving gave us both a feeling that he was trying to see how many of us were there, and what we had on us or near us. His eyes and flashlight scanned the ground around us. We were getting sized up by this guy. For what, I don't know. Once this guy saw his fill of everything around us, he kind of paused for a minute, ended the conversation, and then walked off into the woods with his girl. Once his flashlight disappeared, my friend and I looked at each other, and without saying anything, my friend acknowledged that we should pack up our stuff and move areas, which we did. This was the most unsettling thing that I've ever had happen while camping. I think that guy was going to wait until we were asleep and come back. I just don't know for what. I do know that we were 100% getting sized up that night. It might not seem like much actually happened, but if you ever had a moment with another human being who was sizing you up, you know what I mean. Unless you've been camping, you'll never truly understand how scary encounters like that can be. Back in 2016, my friends and I for the longest time had been itching to go camping to our local camping site in Los Padres National Park in Southern California. When we found the perfect weekend to go that didn't interfere with any of our work schedules, we set the date. 3 days before the trip, we found out that we were going to get hit by a rainstorm. Us, being the type of dudes that we are, didn't care if we got hit by the storm while camping, so we packed up our cars and made the 45-minute drive to the campsite. The campsite was a family-friendly one where there were about 100 camping lots that circled around the clearing in the forest. We found the perfect spot that was underneath huge thick trees that would help block as much rain as possible, and it also helped that the restrooms were only 30 yards away. As soon as we got to our spot, we took advantage of the afternoon sky being clear for the moment, and we rushed to set up. The layout that we did was that we pitched our tents close by, where our tent doors were only 6 feet apart. The reason we did this was in order to combat the rain. I brought a 30-foot by 30-foot thick blue canopy tarp that I threw over to cover us from the rain above and from the rain that would be running on the ground. It ended up being perfect for the rainy weekend, but whenever you would walk around the tent, you would be making so much noise from crunching the plastic tarp. Hours passed by and we were all around the campfire. It was late into the evening, and this was the first time that I noticed that there were barely any other campers. Mainly the other people were camping in their RVs. They were the smart ones, unlike my friends and I that were sleeping in 2 small tents, with our only protection from the rain being the blue tarp. I was getting tired from a long day of work, and I decided that I was going off to knock out, and my friends followed my lead as well. The way that the sleeping arrangements were was that I had my friend Ray sleeping in my tent, and Adam and Seth were sleeping in their own tent. Before I called it a night, I whispered to Ray and told him, "I'm going to prank call Seth and Adam, but I'm not going to say anything." Ray smiled as I dialed my friends up. I called them on a restricted number. Ray and I were holding in our laughter as they ignored our call. I decided to do it one more time. They did answer this time, and Seth replied with a nervous hello into the phone. Ray and I had to hold in our laughter as we kept as quiet as possible, not wanting to make any noises that would give off that it was us. I held the phone close to my mouth as I began to breathe heavily in a murderous way. I ended the call, and just hearing them freak out the way they did was fun. They eventually asked if it was us, and after a while Ray gave in and let them in on the joke. We all eventually calmed down from laughing, and since I fall asleep relatively easily, I was out in a matter of minutes, while Ray, Adam, and Seth were up for a while longer. I was the first of my friends to wake up in the morning, and I had breakfast already cooking by the time everyone else woke up. The smell of me cooking woke my friends up one by one, and they got out of their tents. As we were eating, Adam spoke up and said, "Hey, the prank that you both pulled last night went a little too far." They went on to say that it was one thing to prank call, but then to walk around their tent and go inside of it in the middle of the night was totally off limits. I had no idea what they were talking about, and after some back and forth of questioning and firmly stating no more pranks had been pulled last night, I heard the full story. So, to explain, after I fell asleep, about an hour passed by where Ray, Seth, and Adam were still up. All was quiet in the forest until the sounds of footsteps were heard stepping on our blue tarp that was on the ground. At first, my friends thought that it could have just been a forest animal wandering around, but the heavy footsteps were a dead giveaway that it was a person. The person had been walking all around our tents, making constant figure eights. The person would also place their fingers on the tent fabrics and run them up and down. The footsteps finally stopped after a couple of minutes, right between the doors of our tents. The 3 of them already had their hearts pounding out of their chests. It was silent for a long time, until the sound of a tent zipper being slid open was made. As Adam said, the tent door was only open about halfway, but it was too dark to see anything clearly. But in the darkness, both Seth and Adam saw the silhouette of a man's face pop his head into the tent to look at both of them. Adam and Seth faked being asleep the entire time, but they kept their eyes locked onto the man. The man then opened the tent fully and walked inside the tent, just standing in the entrance. The man didn't say a word or do anything, just watched the both of them laying in their sleeping bags. After the longest minute ever, the man just stepped back out of the tent and his footsteps were heard walking away, disappearing into the night. The entire time that this was happening, Seth and Adam thought that it was either me or Ray doing this as another prank, and Ray thought that it was Adam or Seth doing this. Back to us arguing back and forth at the breakfast table, we were interrupted by a man walking to our campsite, and he greeted us with, "Good morning, boys. How did the 4 of you sleep last night?" This man spoke in a smoker's voice, and he wore a dirty, sweat-stained white t-shirt, and his blue jeans looked as they had never been washed. He smelt like liquor, and his words were all mumbled together. We didn't say a word to this guy, and he asked us if we had any cigarettes to spare him. I told him that we didn't smoke, and he said, "Oh, well, if you boys want to visit me in my RV, just stop by any time." The man continued to walk away towards the restrooms, and as he was done using it, walked back to our campsite. He didn't say anything this time, but he looked at us and gave us a nearly toothless smile, and he walked back to his RV. I took note of his RV, as it was the only RV that stuck out as being dirty and more run down than the others. We quickly summed up the man as the person who was walking around our tents last night, and Seth and Adam now remembered that they smelt liquor from the person who was standing in their tent. We all agreed that we would keep an extra eye out on this guy, and if he did spend another night, we would most likely report him to the park rangers if he tried anything else. When it was around lunchtime now, the man came back, not to use the restroom, but just to talk to us. He started the conversation and said, "So, are any of you boys interested in buying an RV? You can all go check it out right now. Look inside and see if you want to buy it." We told him that we were good, and this time while talking to him, we all responded very simply and sternly. The man seemed to notice this, and he walked away. The man did end up leaving a few hours before sunset, but the entire time that he was there, he kept glancing at us. The man had his RV about 50 yards away from us, and I noticed that he had a restroom right next to his RV. Why did he make an effort in walking all the way over to our campsite to use our restroom? Also, why did he even use the restroom if RVs come with restrooms installed in them? Whatever the man wanted, we were just glad that we were able to enjoy the rest of our weekend in peace after he left. This night I had while camping 4 years ago is the most terrifying thing that has ever happened to me. This happened when my boyfriend and I were still sort of fresh into our relationship. My sister had recommended to me a snorkeling trip for a fun thing to do with him. It was at this quarry surrounded by a campground that is filled in with water, and it's known for its crystal clear water and its diving. There's apparently a helicopter and a school bus that people dive down to see. My boyfriend and I decided to go camping for the night. So at first it was a really good time. We snorkeled in the shallow area of the quarry, and although the depth of the water was a bit scary, I still enjoyed myself. The water is 65 feet deep, so once you swim out of the shallow area, it immediately dropped off and it was pitch black. This is actually where I realized I'm terrified of deep water. Anyways, it was a fun day, and my boyfriend and I were winding down our night back at our campsite. We were camping in a grassy patch down a hill from the road. Our tent was pitched in a wooded area that our campsite was extended to, and just across the way was a campsite that looked lived in, but our neighbors were out. We were making hot dogs over the fire when the neighbors got back. It was fairly late at night now, and they immediately went to sleep. I'd say 20 to 30 minutes after they got back is when things started to become spooky. My boyfriend and I were chatting when we noticed a dark figure watching us from up the hill. Because of the shadow of the fire, we could not actually make out the characteristics of the figure, but we knew that he was staring directly at us, almost hiding behind our neighbor's truck. He had watched us for what felt like forever until he started walking down the road again. We both watched him in silence, watching him walk behind the trees up by the road. I anticipated each time I'd see him walk forward behind a tree and watch him come out on the other side. He walked behind for a good 4 or 5 trees until I noticed that he had stopped walking. Or was he behind a tree still? I was totally freaked out, wondering where he went or if he was just hiding behind a tree. I watched my boyfriend looking at what happened and thinking the same thing, but he shrugged it off, and I naively did too. We actually ended up forgetting about it and went for a walk to the quarry. It was beautiful seeing the stars reflecting against the water, but the deep and now all-black water was terrifying to say the least. We walked back to our campsite, lied in our tent, and I soon began to feel an uneasy feeling which I was trying to ignore. After some silence between us, my boyfriend asked me, "Do you feel like we're being watched?" I said, "Why would you think that?" half joking, but also seriously getting scared. My boyfriend wanted to get out from the tent, so we were standing by my car, and I got the stupid idea that being in the middle of the field that was in the middle of the campground was the safest place to be. My logic being if somebody was going to come up to us, at least we'd be able to see them. So we were in the middle of this field when we saw a similar looking shadow figure from earlier staring at us. We both noticed him while walking, and he was walking in the same direction as us. We changed directions, and so did he. We told one another that if we changed directions again, and the figure does too, that we were going to book it to my car. When we changed ways again, he followed us and we booked it to the car. I watched from my seat as they slowly walked back into the darkness while staring in our direction. We agreed to leave the campground for the night, but our campground gear was outside still. We quietly got our things together, trying not to freak each other out, but we were very alert. We got home at around 1 a.m., and when I told my father the story the next day, he said he was glad we got out of there or else we could have been murdered. 2 people had died in that campground while snorkeling, which I found out after I got back. I don't know how they died. Maybe it was swimming at night in the quarry or something. but my boyfriend and I think that person had some bad intentions and potentially wanted to kill us. They had clearly been stalking us all night, and if they were just there to steal some gear and such, they would have done it when we went on our nighttime walk to the quarry. A couple of years ago, a group of friends and I planned a camping trip in Yellowstone Park. The four of us had been camping multiple times in national parks before, but never one the size of Yellowstone. It was going to be close to a week-long trip of sightseeing and enjoying nature. We had planned out well the first couple of days of the trip, determining where we would be camping and places to see. After those first couple days, though, we didn't have much of a plan, and we had decided that part of the adventure was being spontaneous and going wherever interested us. The first part of the trip went well, as we saw a lot of popular tourist attractions and had fun hanging out at night around our campsite. Towards the end of the trip, however, we were looking for a campsite to camp for the night and had a hard time finding one. We were in the stage of our trip where nothing was planned. It was already dark out, late at night, and every campground in the nearby area that we visited was already full and didn't have any room for us. Eventually, we drove past an open lot area that had some scattered fire pits created with stones and looked like a good spot to camp at. The area wasn't online and didn't show up as a named campsite on Google Maps, but clearly people had camped there before. The area was empty and we didn't see anyone, so we decided to set up camp there for the night. We had to set up the tent in the dark with flashlights. It was already late, so unlike the other nights of our trip, we didn't really hang out. We just got into the tent and fell asleep relatively quickly. I woke up in the middle of the night. My friends had shaken me awake and quietly whispered that something seemed off. Immediately, I understood what they were talking about, because from the woods surrounding our campsite, there was an odd number of bird sounds being made. It was still the middle of the night and not close to morning, so really, there should have been no birds making sounds, but instead, there were multiple different types of bird sounds every couple minutes. As a group, we agreed quietly and without turning on any sort of light to exit our tent and check it out. We left the tent and ended up huddling right beside our car, which was right next to the tent, since we had used the headlights for setting up the tent earlier. As we waited for our eyes to adjust to the dark and notice if we could see anything, the bird sounds got closer, but then stopped altogether. At that point, we knew that those sounds were not normal, and that it had to be people communicating to each other as they had been coming from different directions of the woods. It only took a quick non-verbal look at each other to decide that getting in the car would be the smartest thing to do right now. After scrambling to get in and then turn on the engine and lights, what we saw at the edge of the woods line running towards us was horrifying. There were two men humans running towards us. I call them humans because I don't even know if they were men or women because of how dirty and feral looking they were. We drove out of there as fast as we could, seeing three more people on the opposite side of the wood line when our headlights illuminated over that way. We drove through the night all the way until we had made it out of Yellowstone Park, abandoning our tent since all of us had our important valuables that we needed already in the car. None of us can recall or determine what area of the park we were in, but it definitely wasn't anywhere near a populated campground. We agreed to cut our camping trip a bit short and buy a hotel for the last night. We didn't go camping together again for a very long time after that scary night in Yellowstone. My friends from college and I tried to stay as close as possible after we had graduated from school. One of the ways that we would do this is by all of us taking a week off during the summer or fall and going on a camping road trip. Last year, we had planned together and decided to go camping in the mountains of Colorado towards the end of the summer. Once our flight landed, we purchased our rental car and we were off to the mountains for some camping. The second night that we were out there, we found a nice small camping area with individual lots. The lots were distanced from each other well enough to where it felt like our own individual campground, especially with all the trees surrounding us. We had picked a lot close to the small creek, which flowed nearby close to the highway, so that we could wash off after a long day of hiking. We set up our campsite while it was still light out that evening, so we wouldn't have to set anything up after dark. Once everything had been set up, we headed to a restaurant in the closest town for some dinner. We arrived back to the campsite after dark and were surprised to see that our tent flap was open and stuff had been moved around outside. There was nobody in the clearing of our campsite, but somebody had gone through our stuff. It was a disturbing scene, but we proceeded with our night. It was time to get some sleep soon, so we grabbed our towels and shampoo and walked the short 5-minute walk to the stream to wash off. The water was very cold, but it was still quite refreshing in a way. It wasn't until after we had all exited the stream and were drying ourselves with towels on the riverbank that I noticed something. Across the stream on the opposite bank, there was 100% somebody watching us. Not wanting to alarm my friends, and also not wanting to let the figure on the other side of the stream know that I had seen them, I suggested that we go back to camp. On the walk back to our campsite, I briefly explained to my friends that I had seen someone across the stream from us in the woods. Between that and the incident of somebody rummaging through our tent while we were gone, it was decided that we would sleep in the car tonight. It was already hard to sleep and get comfortable in the car, and the added anxiety about the person I had seen by the stream didn't help either. The whole night I kept glancing out the windows, seeing if I would see anybody lurking around in the moonlight. At some point in the middle of the night, I glanced outside the car window, and my fears were true. There was a figure crouching down by the entrance of our tent, slowly unzipping it. I watched in horror as the person quickly found out there was nobody in our tent and then turned their head towards our car. The figure slowly disappeared around the back of our tent and began crouch walking closer to the car. I frantically woke up my friends at the same time while reaching into the driver's seat to honk the horn. The honking of the horn was effective as we watched the figure leave the campsite and disappear into the woods. What will always stick with me from that night is how the figure we had seen didn't run away frightened. They calmly just stood up and walked away from us into the woods, not bothered at all that we had seen them. Nobody got any more sleep that night in the car, as we stayed up and alert and paranoid that the figure would try to return. We didn't have any more problems for the last couple hours of the night until it started getting light out. We had planned on staying at this camping location for 2 nights, but it's needless to say, we didn't stay there for the second night, even though we had already paid for it. We continued the rest of our camping trip, moving to a different campsite. Thankfully, there was no more issues the rest of the trip, but that night will be vivid in my memory for a long time. This story takes place many years ago when I was camping alone out in California. I haven't gone camping in many years now, but when I was younger, I would go on many weekend camping trips to get out in nature by myself and relax. I did these camping trips quite frequently, almost every other weekend it felt like. I loved being out in nature, but did not like the discomfort of sleeping on the ground in a tent. For how often I went camping, it made sense for me to buy a small little camper that would attach and be part of the bed of my truck. It was really nice and could comfortably fit me and even one more if I needed. One of my weekend trips, I drove about 5 hours away from my house to a beautiful area that I hadn't been to before. I spent the day doing a long hike and then cooling off in a peaceful lake during the evening. By nighttime, I had parked my truck in a quiet remote area, sort of up a mountain so that I could have a nice view when I woke up in the morning. I was still up reading a book by flashlight when I heard footsteps outside and someone approaching the truck. Normally, I don't ever have people walking anywhere near my truck, so it was odd to hear for sure. Maybe I had parked in a bad spot, or somewhere I wasn't allowed to be and somebody was coming to let me know. Either way, I didn't feel comfortable, especially since it was after dark at this point. I called out a greeting of, "Hello, who's there?" as the footsteps approached closer. A raspy male voice responded saying, "Hi there, I just wanted to check out your camper. Pretty nifty." I was really quite comfortable laying in my bed in the camper in the back of the truck, so I yelled out that I could show them the camper in the morning, assuming they were maybe camping nearby. There was no response from the man outside for what felt like a couple of minutes. Finally, I heard him muttering to himself, but couldn't make out anything of what he was saying. Assuming that was that, I went back to reading. Oddly though, I didn't hear any footsteps retreating away. The man had to still be standing there. He was, and after a few moments, I heard footsteps moving around my truck, but still not leaving. There was tiny little porthole-like windows on the side of my camper, which I kept covered with curtains at night. I looked outside, but couldn't see the man at all, and it sounded like he had walked to the front of my truck, Next thing I know, I heard some quiet thumps starting from the hood of my truck and eventually getting closer to me. Whoever this person was had the audacity to climb onto my truck and crawl onto the roof of my truck towards the camper in the bed of it. I was a person who took very good care of my truck, and this guy was pissing me off to say the least. I shouted out, alerting the person that I had a firearm with me, and if they didn't get off my truck and leave, I was going to come out with my gun. I heard the man get off of my truck and walk away a bit, but I still didn't hear their footsteps fade away as they would have if they had completely left. I got out of my camper with the firearm and my flashlight. Upon pointing the flashlight around, I saw the man crouching down near a bush about 40 feet away. As the flashlight illuminated him, he backed away farther into the darkness. I had had enough with whoever this person was at this point. I didn't know if it was somebody who had gone on drugs or somebody crazier, but I shouted to him to leave and not come back. I was already up at this point and was driving back home in the morning anyways, so I packed my stuff up and headed home early. Whether it be due to scary encounters such as I had with a person or something animal related, I've always had my firearm with me when I went camping, and I'm thankful that I had it on me that night. My family timeshares a cabin on a lake, and we go there about once a month. We have a pretty large family, and oftentimes we invite up friends or significant others with us as well. Because of how crowded the sleeping situation can get inside the small cabin, a group of us, normally the younger adults, will pitch a tent outside to sleep in. The best spot for the tent to be set up is on the sandy beachfront right by the water, since it's softer than the yard. One weekend towards the end of July, there were many people staying at the cabin that weekend. It was a perfect night outside, so a group of 4 had decided to sleep outside in the tent. The group included my older brother and his girlfriend, as well as my younger brother and me. That night, I was woken up to the sound of a boat engine on the lake. Sometimes fishermen would go out onto the lake in the middle of the night because they wouldn't have to deal with the daytime activities of jet skis and pontoons. The fishermen never came too close to anyone else's property though. This motor engine, although it was running quietly, was getting closer to our beach where the tent was set up. My older brother had also been awoken by the noise of the boat, so we went out together to check out what was going on. Walking out onto our dock, we saw a fishing boat slowly drifting by only about 15 to 20 feet from our dock. The moonlight revealed that the boat was empty. We watched, confused, as the boat drifted into our neighbor's beach area by the waves on the lake. Both my brother and I stood frozen on the dock, not knowing what to think about what we were seeing. The silence of the night was broken by our neighbor's dog barking, and then our 2 dogs joined in on the barking. My brother and I ran back down the dock towards the beach, and were about to start walking up the hill towards our cabin, when a figure emerged from the darkness of my neighbor's yard. The person had a black wetsuit on, and some type of mask with goggles on over their face. Our cabin and our neighbor's cabin are close to each other, and we saw the figure run past us about 90 feet away at most. They entered the boat and then drove away back out onto the lake, looking towards my brother and I standing on the beach by our tent as they drove away. We found out the next day that our neighbor's cabin had been broken into, but their dog scared the person away before anything happened or before anything was taken. It was an eerie experience, especially basically camping in the middle of all the action, seeing the empty boat and the figure escaping into the night. I don't think the person in the black wetsuit knew that we were camping out on the beach. Otherwise, I don't think they would have come so close with their boat. Our family still goes to that cabin fairly often, and hasn't seen the boat or the figure in the wetsuit anymore. But our parents use it as a scary story, exaggerating a bit, to spook people before they go out and sleep in the tent on the beach. Many years ago, a friend and I decided to take a bicycle trip together. Our goal was to bike most of the day on bike trails, and then find a place to camp at night. We had made good progress towards our destination, and arrived in about 2.5 days. We were going to relax in the small town that we were in for the rest of the day, by swimming in the lake and getting a nice dinner in a restaurant, after eating beans and bread for the last couple of days we had been biking. The bike trails we were on didn't really have any good camping spots, so we had been finding places that would work, like the edges of parks and the backs of cemeteries. We found a quiet spot in the cemetery to camp for a night before starting the last half of the trip back home the next day. The spot we found really was nice. It was at the back area of the cemetery, out of view from the main street, and there was a nice area of mulch which we set our tent up over to sleep on. That night was also the night before the 4th of July, so there was a decent amount of fireworks which my friend and I watched sitting outside in our tent. The sun had already set, and where we sat outside our tent, there were multiple instances where we felt like we saw something move, or some sort of motion out of the corner of our eyes. My friend and I had already slept in graveyards earlier on this bike trip, and we had gotten into the habit of walking around and reading graves, so it was something to do to pass the time. Partly because of the odd movements that we felt like we were seeing, and partly because we were bored, we grabbed a flashlight and began walking around checking out the area. We stumbled across one grave that saddened us. It was a baby's grave with a bunch of toy cars on the ledge of the grave. We normally didn't get spooked in graveyards, but we both glanced at each other as it got really windy and chilly for a second, and then stopped as soon as it started. Down the row from us, we saw a tiny opaque figure gliding away from us. It was a child-sized figure that we saw for a few seconds before it simply vanished. Thoroughly spooked now, we went back to the tent and had a restless night of sleep, waking up often. We were both relieved when we woke up while the sun was rising and we could begin to pack up and start our ride home. I opened the flap of the tent and was about to step outside when I saw something lying on the ground right outside of the tent. There were 2 toy cars laying outside, the same type from the grave that we had seen last night. After both my friend and I swore that we didn't get up in the night and move those cars at each other, we walked them over to the baby's grave, and sure enough, there were 2 empty spots where cars had been last night. We finished wrapping up our stuff and were on our way, leaving the graveyard. I had never previously believed in spirits of any kind, but I wasn't skeptical anymore, as I had seen with my own eyes that there was some sort of presence at the cemetery we had stayed at. Last year, I went camping with my wife in an RV we borrowed from her parents. They used it occasionally, and would always talk about how fun it was. My wife had gone with them several times in the past, but I never had before. I've really never been much into camping, but I decided why not give it a go. It was, after all, in a camper, and we wouldn't be pitching tents or sleeping in the rain. The RV was one of those that you drive, and it's rather large. It had a bed area above the driver's seats and a big TV in the living room, as well as an actual small bedroom in the back. We drove it up north a few hours to a campsite, and we parked it. When we got there, we went outside and cooked some food just outside the RV in the park nearby. We explored the park a little bit after that until it got dark and the bugs started to get bad. At that point, I was happy we had an RV and we went back inside. As it got late, we started watching a movie on the TV inside of our RV. It was a relaxing and calm night. Afterwards, we retired and got ready for bed. As I was walking to the front of the RV to get something, I barely saw the top of a guy's head just outside the window. I was in the main living room part of the RV, and all of our lights were out. Because of this, I had a better view outside. I didn't think the guy had seen me, but I wasn't quite sure who he was or what he was doing outside. There hadn't really been any people directly next to us. Plus, we weren't like right by a sidewalk or a road. We had purposely got a spot a little ways out. I walked over to the front of the RV. We had a window cover on the windshield, so I went up to the little bunk area and looked out the small window on the side of it. I could barely see that there was a guy standing right in front of our RV and looking at it. He seemed to examine it for about 10 seconds or so, and then walk off. I kept a watch for a few more minutes, and after not seeing him, I decided to go to bed. I was pretty sleepy and laid right down and closed my eyes. I was just starting to drift off when I heard my wife sit up very suddenly next to me. I opened my eyes and looked at her. She was staring out the window, and when she saw I was now sitting up as well, she whispered to me that she thought she saw a man's head looking inside the window. I looked to the window, and nobody was there now, but I then told my wife of how I had seen a man looking around near our RV not much earlier. We thought about how to handle this situation, and I decided it would be best to go outside and take a look. To be honest with you, I was sort of scared too, but I did want to know who this guy was and what he was doing. I walked forward to the front, and was going to the main side door, but before I could even make it within 5 feet of the door, I heard on the other side of it some movement, and then heard somebody try to open the door. I stopped right where I was and froze. Of course, the door was locked, thankfully, so the guy couldn't get in, but I knew he was right outside. I thought on my feet, literally, and blurted out as loud as I could, "I already called the police, man." I really don't know what made me say that. I hadn't thought about it. I really just said it. I heard the man start to walk away after that. I went over to the window and looked outside, just barely to see him disappearing into the woods. As I watched, my wife came over and looked out the window as well. After that, we decided we didn't want to spend the night there anymore. I knew we wouldn't be able to get much sleep, so we ended up driving the RV down the road and actually parked it in the back of a Walmart parking lot for the night. I'm still not sure what that guy wanted or who he was, but I don't care to find out. This story takes place about 5 years ago. I was in college at the time, and during summers when I was back home, I had a group of high school friends that I would hang out with. There were about 8 of us in the friend group, and we did all sorts of things together. In fact, we still hang out to this day. Anyways, when we all got back from school for the summer one year, we decided to take a camping trip together. We all brought tents, ingredients to make s'mores, and plenty of drinks. We carpooled there in 2 cars to a campsite that was about 3 hours away. When we got there, we got our campsite set up and started hanging out by the lake. We had a campfire going, and most of us were talking, drinking, and just having a good time. We were going late into the night, and in the immediate area, we didn't see any other people at all. Because of this, when we had to pee, we would just run into the woods a little ways and go next to a tree. At one point, I had to go, and got up from my chair around the fire and made my way into the woods. There was a little path there to walk on, and it was amazing how much darker it was away from the fire after looking near it for so long. It took my eyes a while to adjust as I walked into the woods. I got maybe 20 feet in or so when I heard somebody else was in there too. I figured it was one of my friends, so I walked deeper into the woods so we could both have a little more privacy. I made my way maybe 50 feet or so down the path, and then went next to a tree. When I was done, I made my way back to the little trail and was walking back. I started to hear more noises as I did. The noises were coming from in the woods off the path and to the left side. I really didn't think it was one of my friends, because I didn't know why they would go this far in. I thought maybe it could be an animal and feared it was possibly a bear. I picked up my pace of walking, when all of a sudden, I heard a very loud sound of a tree branch cracking. I then saw a giant section of a tree falling right behind me on the path about 5 feet away. I was lucky I had sped up, or I could have been crushed by it. And when I say this tree branch was large, it was massive. I didn't know of anybody or anything that could break a piece of tree off like that. It wasn't raining or storming either, so I wasn't sure how it happened. I was terrified, and then heard more loud noises in the woods, as if something was running. I looked behind me into the woods where the noise was. I saw for a brief second a large dark figure darting between trees and then disappear deeper into the woods. It was moving so fast and strange, like nothing I had ever seen before. At that point, I turned and sprinted all the way back to the fire. When I got back, my friends saw how shaken up I looked and asked me what was wrong. I told them they would never believe me, but I tried my best to explain. Some of my friends mentioned how they did hear a noise of a tree breaking just in the woods and wondered what exactly it was. That made me feel a little bit better, but regardless, I was pretty rattled the rest of the night. If I hadn't been with such a large group of friends, I would have gotten no sleep at all that night. Luckily, after that, the rest of the camping trip was fine, but I'll never forget whatever that was I saw out in the woods. When I was 12, my mom took my best friend and I to go camping. She set us up with an air mattress in the back of her car, while she slept outside in a tent. Everything was going fine at first. We just stayed up talking, making jokes, listening to music, and eating snacks. At about 3 or 4 a.m. though, things started to get weird. We were still awake, and I was looking out the window on my friend's side. When I did, something caught my eye. Something slid up to the window, and its hands pressed up against it. It had an all-white, completely circular head, and a thin black stripe going down the middle. It also had an unnaturally stick-thin body and hands that resembled mittens rather than human hands. Just as it locked eyes with me, it slid away as quickly as it had appeared. At first, I thought I was hallucinating out of my delirium, so I started to laugh and told my friend. Her eyes widened, and she asked me, "You saw it too?" I asked her to describe what she had seen in case she was pranking me, and she described the exact same thing I had seen. We scrambled to make sure all the doors were locked, and although we were secure in the car, it was safe to say we didn't get any sleep for the rest of the night. Last summer, my girlfriend and I went camping for a weekend. Camping is not something that we do a lot, but we do like the outdoors, so we were looking forward to it. We went to a little spot near the woods and seemed to be the only ones camping in that area. When we got there, we had a tent to set up, which took a lot longer than I thought it would take, but once it was up, it made for a nice shelter, and it was a good thing we had it too, because on the first night, shortly after the sun set, it started to rain outside. We hurried to get inside the tent, and decided to just go to bed early, seeing as we wouldn't be able to make a campfire or anything like that with it raining. It wasn't like a pouring rain, but it was steady, and there would occasionally be a little crack of thunder off in the distance. The sound of the rain hitting the tent was a nice relaxing sound. My girlfriend fell asleep not too long after, but it was only like 9 p.m., and I wasn't used to going to bed quite that early. I just wasn't tired yet, and I couldn't sleep. I stayed up and watched YouTube videos on my phone for a while. I did, surprisingly, have pretty good service out there, which was nice. I had my headphones in, not to wake my girlfriend, and as I was watching a video, I noticed at the top of my vision past our tent, there was a shadow of someone walking by. I put down my phone and looked up to see the clear shadow of a man on the side of our tent. This was strange. We hadn't seen anyone else near us, and this guy seemed to be within a couple feet of our tent, facing us. Plus, it was raining a lot outside, and I didn't know why somebody would be out walking. I watched the man slowly walk around to our tent to the other side of it. I removed one of my earbuds and felt my heart start to pound harder and harder. The man walked around to the side of the tent that was near the woods. He then went right by where I was, and I heard a small scraping as if he was running his hand along the side of the tent. I moved back suddenly when I heard this. The man seemed to notice me, but then walked off into the woods. I heard the leaves and trees rustling, going deeper and deeper away. I was glad the man was now gone, but I was concerned as to who he was and what exactly he was doing. I thought about waking up my girlfriend, but ultimately decided not to. I thought I should try to just lay down and go to sleep, because I thought if I stayed up, I might just get paranoid. But as I was laying there, all of a sudden, I heard more scraping against the tent. This time, it was at the side of the tent where our heads were. I looked up and saw the guy was standing right there. I couldn't see any details because I was just seeing his silhouette on the other side of the tent. I lay there not knowing what to do. If this guy did happen to be dangerous or something, I really didn't have anything to defend myself with. I then thought I could barely hear a man's voice mumble something outside of the tent. I couldn't make out anything he said though. Eventually, I saw the shadow back away and out of sight. I didn't hear the man go off into the woods again or anything like that, but I no longer saw his shadow or heard anything other than the rain which was still falling. I laid there looking around for probably an hour and didn't hear or see anything else. Eventually, I was able to fall asleep. The next morning I woke up early at about 7 a.m. It was light out now, and I looked around. The door to our tent had been unzipped and was partially open. I tapped my girlfriend on the shoulder until she woke up. I asked her if she had left the tent at all during the night, and she told me no. I got really creeped out after that, and left the tent and looked all around. There was nobody in sight though, and after telling my girlfriend about what had happened the previous night, we decided to cut our camping trip short and just go home that day. The story I'm about to tell you took place when I was a little kid. I was probably about 5 years old at the time. I remembered that when I was very little, my family went camping a few times. I don't remember a whole lot about most of the times because I was so young, but there was one time that I will definitely never forget. We went to this little campsite about 3 or 4 hours north of where we lived. It was an area with lakes and a lot of woods, typical camping environment. We got there early in the day and went on a walk in the woods. After that, we hung out on the campsite, made food, and then set up our tents. Our tents were fairly small, so we had 2 of them, one for my parents and one for my sister and I. It took us quite a while to set them up, and we had a little campfire before heading off to our tents for bed. We were the only people camping in that particular area, which I remember we were happy about because the previous time we had camped, it was a little crowded. I was in my sleeping bag in the tent, and it was actually pretty comfortable. I wasn't really that tired though. I laid there listening to the sounds of nature. Then I heard footsteps coming over toward our tents. They seemed to go towards my parents' tent and then to my sister and me. I assumed that it was one of my parents. Then they began unzipping my tent. I looked, expecting to see my dad, but instead, it was just some random dude. I just remember he had a mustache and looked kind of old. He stared at me and my sister, who was fast asleep. Then he motioned for me to come closer to him, but I didn't really want to. I had no idea who he was, but I assumed that he was another camper or something. Then he asked me if I would go with him. I just said no. The man looked around for a couple of seconds and then just zipped our tent back up and walked away. Shortly after that, I was able to finally fall asleep. The next day, I forgot all about it and never even mentioned it to my parents. It wasn't until many years later when we went camping once again, I remembered it and realized just how strange and creepy it really was. About a year ago, my girlfriend and I went camping. Her parents had this little pop-out RV trailer that we could use. We went on a little road trip out west, stopping and camping at campgrounds and areas along the way. It was a fun time, and the first couple of days went really well. On the fourth day, I think it was, we drove a very long ways, and by the time we stopped, we were pretty tired. The only campground in the area was this little one off a dirt road that looked really run down. The farther we drove into it, the more sketchy it looked. The place honestly seemed to be abandoned, and we didn't see a single person there at all. We decided to keep going anyways though, and we eventually parked and set up in one of the better looking areas in the site. We parked and set up the RV, and then we went inside of it at about 9 p.m. We got in the back and watched a movie on my laptop and relaxed before bed. But not even 30 minutes into the movie, we heard some rustling in the bushes surrounding our camper. I paused the movie and we became silent to hear better. Then we saw a shadow outside that was walking. It was definitely a human and not an animal. We didn't know who or why anybody would be over here at this time. We saw the shadow of the person walking around us at about 10 feet away. Then it seemed to get closer, and finally we heard the door rattle a little bit as if someone was trying to open it. When I heard this, I immediately got up and ran to the door and opened it, but when I did, nobody was there. It was just a quiet, dark night with nothing to be seen. I took a couple of steps outside and looked around, then I went back in. We finished watching the movie, and then we were ready to go to sleep. My girlfriend stepped outside to go to the bathroom, and I put my laptop away. But just a few seconds after my girlfriend went outside, I heard her scream. I went outside and saw her about 10 feet away, pointing at my truck. I looked over and saw crouched down behind my truck looking directly at me was a creepy old man. He looked very old and dirty. He had a long beard and was smiling with a very creepy look on his face. He had his arm around the back part of my truck. I yelled at him to get away. He just sat there and started laughing. It was one of the creepiest things I ever saw. I told him he needed to get away from my truck, but he just kept laughing. Then slowly he backed away into the woods, laughing hysterically the entire time. We packed up our things as quickly as we could, and then drove to a nearby hotel for the rest of the night. About 10 years back, I went on a camping trip alone in the wilderness. I drove about 5 hours to an isolated area to camp for a week with nothing but just essentials. I consider myself an outdoorsman, and I enjoy doing this type of thing. I got up there and was all set up in a little area. Then I went into the woods, searching for some materials to build a little shelter. I walked for a while, but then I noticed another man walking a distance away. It was unusual that I would ever see other people when I went camping like this, and I honestly didn't want to see other people. I walked a little bit farther, and then we made eye contact briefly. He looked at me and waved. Then we started to walk towards each other. We met and shook hands, and he asked me what I was doing over here. The man just seemed a little odd, but I couldn't figure out exactly why. He first told me that he was camping about a 20-minute walk south of there, and then he asked me if I was planning on staying over here. I told him I was setting up a little ways up, and he asked me if I would move. Then he asked me if I had seen anything else since I had gotten here. The guy was just coming off as strange to me, so I decided I would sleep there that night and then move to a different location in the morning. I told him I should get going, and we parted ways. I walked back to my spot and set up a little area for the night, and then went to bed. I woke up early the next morning at dawn. I got up and began packing to leave and go to another location. As I was packing my things, I saw out of the corner of my eye a man walking about 30 feet away. It was the same man I had seen from yesterday. I asked him what he was doing over here. He told me he thought I was leaving and said he was just walking to get some wood for his fire. I finished packing my things and then left. I went to another site and camped for the next few days there, and then went home. When I arrived home, I learned shortly after that a man wanted for murder had been found in those same woods I had started at. Sure enough, it was the man I had spoken to several times. That coincidence still really creeps me out to this day.
This happened a few years back. I was 11 years old at the time, with my family driving in the middle of nowhere, Montana. It was also the middle of the night in the dead of winter. We used to own this place in the literal middle of nowhere, and every once in a while we'd drive out and spend a week fishing, camping, and hiking. So we were driving back towards civilization, and everyone was tired. Big walls of snow were on either side of the road. Beyond the dirty snowbanks, you could see thick tree lines. We were cruising along, climbing up over this mountain pass. I remember I had half my forehead pressed up against the cold glass while I tiredly watched what little snow and nature I could make out in the dark. Then I saw this person. I will always remember her as a female. Maybe that's just what I settled on in my head, but either way, they were wearing a tattered coat, multiple layers, and carrying a couple of big bags. I remember seeing a flash of a cold face. I wasn't the only one to see her though. My dad mumbled, "See that? Must be freezing out there." And my mom said something like, "Maybe we should give them a ride." But we were already a half-mile away. So we got to the top of this mountain. I could tell because I got that feeling in my ears, and we began the descent down to the other side. The driving conditions were not great, but the old family car was doing just fine. We leveled out a bit, and I started scanning the distance for any signs of a city, town, or anything. Still nothing but snow and trees out there. We were totally alone. We began the real descent, and we started winding down this mountain pass. I was staring out the window at the snow and trees as the drive got scary. We hadn't passed a car for what seemed like hours. I remember my dad started talking about something, and that's when I saw her again, standing out in the snow. I got a brief glimpse when they were illuminated by the headlights, but then gone. This time I got a better look at her face, and I wish I hadn't. A really strange smile in the middle of a very disfigured face. Maybe she was a horrible burn victim. In that brief second, I couldn't get the image out of my head, but it felt like she was staring right at me, smiling, some messed up kind of understanding in her small black eyes. So we drove on for a bit, and I remember just staring out the window. It immediately struck me. How did she get there? How did she travel miles and miles and miles in front of us? We didn't pass a car, truck, or anything, and there wasn't really any other road out there. We eventually got to the bottom of that mountain and made it to some roadside motel where we stayed for the night. The next morning, we found this little diner right outside the town that we stayed in. It was a classic trucker's stop type of diner. We ate and played I Spy. After the bill was paid and we zipped up our coats, I heard the doors chime. We were all heading out when I looked up and saw her again. The same coat, The dozens of hooded sweaters, the big bags filled with what looked like damp clothing. I was walking out behind my dad, and I remember that she gave this look at me as she passed. She really looked like she hated me, like she knew things I didn't, looking at me with that huge disfigured smile. She stopped beside me, but I stayed behind my dad until we got in the car. I don't know what really was going on. I couldn't help but feel bad for her if she was truly lost out there walking for miles in the cold, or maybe someone had hurt her. Probably a dozen of explanations for the whole experience, but I can't shake the weird feeling like she was following us.